So this is the story of how we set up our off-grid electrical system that powers our 3 shipping containers. From building a solar panel array using some eastern hemlock trees harvested in our forest, to running cables hundreds of feet underground, to connecting the batteries and getting the inverter up and running. A big thank you to Renogy for sponsoring this video and sending us all of the panels, batteries, and inverter so we could test out the new Renogy One core system, which will allow us to monitor and manage our system remotely from anywhere in the world. So I began the process of building our solar array over a year before I thought we would actually need it, because in the fall I wasn't really sure when the ground would freeze solid and also how long it would stay frozen for. I'd never dug holes with our tractor in the winter before, so I basically just wanted to try and get the structure built as quickly as possible before winter came. So I harvested a bunch of eastern hemlock trees. And these trees are really nice to work with because they grow relatively straight and they're relatively light as well. I've built the wall tent with them, the outhouse with them, a different solar panel array. And if you harvest them in the fall, they're quite light. In the spring, they're significantly heavier, but the advantage in the spring is that the bark peels right off, whereas if you harvest them in the fall, the bark does not peel right off. Having the tractor is super helpful for getting them out of the forest, just because it means you don't have to lift every single log and you can work with them in like a nice, dry, clean area. This is honestly one of my favorite steps in the entire process because I feel like so much of the work I do is like intense power tools that are loud and there's like dangerous things happening, whether it's like chemicals or blades or it's just like a lot of very intense work, and peeling logs is basically the exact opposite of that. It's super relaxing. It's like very, very physical. Your forearms and your arms start to burn pretty quickly. And in the fall, these logs do not peel all that easily. It's not like hard work, but if you've experienced like peeling a log in the spring where it's basically like an onion and the entire outer bark comes off all at once, peeling them in the fall is nothing like that. So I enlisted Dana to help with the process, and I got to take care of Max for a little bit. And it's just like a really, really relaxing job. Honestly, like one of my favorite things I've done on the homestead so far is just peeling logs. And the hope with that is that they'll last longer, and I kind of also just like the way it looks better. So once the logs were peeled, I got ready to dig the holes I would need to put the solar array into the ground. As you can see, winter came a little earlier than expected, but I'm still kind of hoping that the ground isn't too frozen. It was like a very, very early snow, and then this ended up like melting pretty quickly afterwards. But it was really, really cold for a period of about 3 weeks, and I wasn't entirely sure. I know they make like special buckets you can put on your backhoe so that it can dig through ice, but we don't have one of those, and turned out to be totally fine. The first like 6 inches to a foot of soil was frozen, but after that, the tractor dug through the earth basically as good as it always does. The soil around us is pretty rocky, but it's pretty easy to dig through also, I think. A very high clay content, so it's quite wet, but otherwise it's very, very easy to get through with the backhoe, and I've also gotten quite a bit better at digging, so it goes faster. I find with the tractor, it's quicker to just dig trenches rather than trying to dig individual holes, because once you get down to the depth you need, it goes through the soil way faster than like the process of going down basically takes way longer than the process of going side to side. So once I got the posts into the ground, the really challenging part I think in the entire process is just leveling them side to side, and it's just a little tricky because the logs aren't perfectly straight, so the level doesn't really help all that much. and trying to use a laser level also basically does not work in direct sunlight. You could come out at night and use that, but it's very, very hard to see the line. I cover the posts with this thing called Post Saver, which I think has a warranty of like 25 years. It says it will like extend the life of the post in the ground, but I'm not sure I install it like perfectly, so I don't know if like that will be the case with these posts. I really like this type of building though, because it's kind of like a semi-permanent structure. It doesn't take that long to build. It also costs almost nothing at first. The logs are basically just free. I mean, there's the cost of the fossil fuels to run the chainsaw and the tractor and stuff like that. Well, it was a bit of a mad dash to get these holes dug for the solar field, but we did it. The top foot of soil was pretty much frozen solid, but luckily the tractor, I guess, can still dig through that amount of ice, and then the soil underneath was totally fine. But yeah, it was really, really wild. Now there's like some dirt that still needs to be shoveled into the holes, and I've learned from some of the other projects that if you get a little too ambitious with the tractor and try and push the final bit of dirt in, you can really mess things up and hit one of the posts and kind of knock it out of alignment, and there's really no way to recover except to dig it all up and start again with that post. So basically I'm just gonna shovel for as long as I can. The sun already set, and anything I don't shovel tonight is gonna freeze solid, and I guess we'll just have to wait for the next warm bit of weather. So that's about as far as I got on that project before the snow really came in, but that was kind of as far as I needed to get as well. And then when our friend Audie came to visit from Berlin, the two of us continued with the project, basically just cutting the posts with the chainsaw to level the tops and then connecting all 6 of them. This part goes way faster if you have 2 people, but I've also done this process alone and it works fine too. It's just like a little tedious, and you have to like invent little systems to hold things in place. So 2 people really, really speeds this along. And basically we just bolted a couple 2x6s through the posts, and then we have some 2x6s on top reinforced with 2x4s, just because I happen to have a whole pallet of 2x4s. And a lot of the stuff I build with is just the stuff I have on hand. So I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, but after we built our garden, I started to think about the possibility of moving the solar array, because I didn't really like the placement blocking the view of the garden. And after seeing the way the sun moved through the mountain the whole winter, I found a spot that I thought would be significantly better slightly up the hill. So I set about undoing the construction and moving the entire thing up the hill. This entire process of moving it from start to finish took, I think, 1 day of work, maybe like 8 hours in terms of like hours. Luckily, the post just came straight out of the ground and I wasn't even required to dismantle it in any way. And then I got really lucky when I put it back into the new hole, that the hole I had dug was almost perfectly level. So the whole thing came out really, really well. I broke a couple of the 2x6s in the process, so we basically just swapped those out for fresh ones. And then I backfilled, and yeah, it really, really wasn't as hard as it looks. And the new spot I found to put the panels is significantly better. I think we're gaining like an additional 4 hours of sunlight, which is pretty cool. And this wood also isn't as heavy as it looks. So after that, I got started with the solar panel install. These are the 450 watt solar panels that we got from Renogy. I really, really like the size of these panels. I've done the 100-watt ones before in the past, and it feels like they don't do that much, like they just don't generate that much electricity. These panels, on the other hand, I feel like are basically the max size that one person can easily install on their own. And they have like a very strong frame. So I was kind of worried if I was going to be able to do this part of the process entirely alone, because I just didn't want to break these panels. But it actually worked out really, really well. And I like to use roofing screws with the rubber gaskets to screw them into the wood, just so this way you don't go too strong with the drilling and break any of the like aluminum fasteners, since those are actually quite fragile. But yeah, I just like really love building solar arrays. It's one of my favorite projects so far. It's just really, really satisfying to like build things that end up working for you, like generating electricity for you, and require almost no maintenance. I mean, I'm definitely going to have to shovel snow off of these in the winter, but it's just really, really cool after you're like running a generator for very long periods of time to have electricity that's completely quiet and doesn't require any gasoline. Max and Dana even got involved in the process, and then I used the bucket on the tractor to do the final bit of attaching in the center, because it took me a little while to figure out how I was going to get those screws in the center. But yeah, turned out really, really well. I love the placement. So the next step in the process, part 2, the wire run, is definitely my least favorite part of the entire process, and also by far the most tedious. The main problem we are trying to solve is how to get electricity into our 3 off-grid shipping containers. And we knew the batteries and the inverter would go into one of the containers, but in order to get electricity to the other 2 containers, we decided we would try and build a couple steel boxes and attach those to the outside frame, weld them on, cut a hole, and then run conduit through those frames so that the conduit pipes would go all the way through the insulation into the interior of each of the shipping containers. And originally my idea had been to use 2 of the 3 pipes to move air in and out so we could use our wood burning stove to heat the other containers, but I ran a bunch of tests and it just didn't seem worth it to continue down that road. So even though there's 3 pipes, only one of them is really in use. Maybe one day I will give it another go with the air circulation, but for now I'm scrapping that idea. So throughout the rest of the winter, I chipped away at the project, and by late spring, I was almost done. Here I am welding on a box for the electrical wires to run into. The steel I used, by the way, is way too thick, but that was kind of the only steel I had on hand, and it ended up working out fine. It just took a little bit of effort to drill through. It would have been better to use something thin.
All right, come take a look at my new toy. It's just a rental. This is hopefully gonna save me a ton of time. I just gotta figure out how to unload it from the truck.
So I was pretty optimistic that this trenching machine I rented from Home Depot would work and dig a nice clean little trench from the solar panels all the way to the shipping containers a couple 100 feet away, but it just could not cope with our rocky soil. It did not work, and it was very, very disappointing.
What do you think of the trencher? Big letdown, huh? Very big letdown. So there goes 5 hours of my time and $150.
So I feel like digging holes with the tractor is actually one of the skills I've gotten best at in terms of like where I was and where I am now. And this entire process really didn't take all that long. Definitely less time than renting and returning a trenching tool from Home Depot. But obviously you end up with a trench that's way too deep and way too wide. So yeah, you win some, you lose some.
All right, it is done. I dug a trench with the tractor from the solar panels to the office shipping container. Now I know why using a trencher would have been so much better, because this is like 4 feet deep, 2 feet wide, and it's gonna take a while to backfill.
We had some pretty intense thunderstorms at this point in the summer, so this process took a little longer than I think it had to, just because the trench ended up filling with water and I had to wait for dry, sunny days because I didn't want this pipe to get full of water before it was all connected. It's also just kind of time consuming to go to the hardware store, get all these different pieces. It's like definitely a part of the process that I hadn't anticipated being so tedious. But it's also cool to have finally done it. I've never like taken on a project like this. That funny little piece is so that the ground can like rise and fall in the summer and winter without breaking the pipe. And as you can see, the steel I used is way too thick, but it does still work to get a nice hole through it. And basically you just connect all of the different pieces of conduit together. And then we had to do a pretty long wire run. I got Dana and Max to help me with this part of the process because it was almost impossible to do this part alone. Even though I set up that hose thing, it just would not work without having someone else feeding the cable through. Yeah, this whole thing took quite a little while. In between those two shots is like 4 hours of work, but we were able to do it. And yeah, I'm really happy with the way things turned out. Backfilling did not end up taking as long as I thought it would, but I made a pretty brutal mistake and I didn't compact the soil well in the trench as I was going. So yeah, it just created a lot of problems down the road. I think next time around I'll have to like backfill slow, compress the soil, and then continue backfilling, because the tractor ended up falling into the trench a little bit, and then I had to get a couple loads of rocks delivered just so I could really cover the trench well. So after talking with the people at Renogy, we decided to run the solar panels in a series parallel connection. And basically you just follow the wiring diagram and it's pretty straightforward. But I've never done a series connection before, so I was a little bit nervous about this just because you end up working with a much higher voltage, which is how you get that electricity from the panels all the way to the office without having to have a massive wire size. So the batteries in the inverter are really the heart of the whole system, and we knew from the beginning we wanted to have them in the office just because inverters tend to make a pretty annoying like sound from the fan, and we also knew we wanted to put the entire system inside some sort of couch. The couch is designed in such a way to be removable, but also not like that removable, just because you really don't need access to the batteries or the inverter frequently with like the app that they have and the different displays. It's just like if you need to change something or fix something, then it's nice to have access to the compartment, but it's not the kind of thing that you need access to on a daily basis once you have it running well. The inverter we're using is the 48 volt inverter charger. I really like this machine because it's an inverter and a charger, which saves space. And it's cool because it can also charge the batteries from a generator with up to 40 amps, which is definitely something we take advantage of. These are 48 volt lithium batteries. We have 4 of them, but there is room under here for an additional 4 in the future, which would be pretty cool. So I feel like if we put them there and then I move that over a little bit, then we would have room for another 4 on that side, because this requires 8 inches of clearance on every side, and you want it to vent well because it'll heat up a little bit. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. There's a ton of space to work with. Freya's toast. So I've never built a 48 volt solar system before. We've basically always done 12 volts in the past, but I think the advantage with the 48 is that you just get more power for less money. They're not as common, I feel like, but a lot of the people we know around here who have off-grid like cabins or hunting cabins have usually a 48 volt system. And it ended up being pretty similar to the 12 volt work. I thought it was going to be substantially different. Basically, the wire run I'm doing right there is just to downsize the wire from the solar panels so that it'll fit into the inverter charger, because we ran a pretty large cable from the solar panels, and that large cable wasn't going to fit into the place where the wires go in the inverter. And then also just grounding all of the panels and grounding the entire system. All right, we got the batteries all hooked up, inverter hooked up. This is the breaker over here. So we just switched them from shelf mode to active. Slow flashing green light means standby. So because they're all in parallel, that looks good. Then if we turn this on, amazing. Thank you so much for the help.
No problem, sir. And you have an evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are we able to resolve your concern on today's call?
Yes! And that is why you want to work with a company that will actually help you if you don't know what you're doing. So, big shout out to Renogy customer support. I guess when you switch the breaker on initially, the light on the batteries goes from green to yellow just for a second, but then I was like scared to test it and see how long it would stay yellow, but the guy on the phone told me just give it a try and it switches back to green. So I did everything correctly. And yeah, it's just like nice to have someone on the phone to hold your hand and walk you through it once in a while, especially with electrical stuff, which I always feel like a little less confident with. But the system seems to be working, and all we need now is to connect the solar panels and see if we can start charging these batteries.
Come on, Freya. Let's go turn on the solar panels.
Alright. It does not look like the solar panels were wired correctly, or potentially I broke the cable in the road somewhere underground. Bum bum bum. All right, 2 hours later, what do we got going on? Solar. Wow. The sun just hit the panels. It's like sunset, but there's a little bit of light. And we're up to 17 amps at the end of the day. That's really cool. Holy moly guacamole. It's charging. This light means it's charging. I was so worried that I damaged that cable somehow. I would have to redo the entire trench, but everything seems to be working totally fine. Fans just switched on for the charging. This is like absolutely amazing news.
Wow. I cannot believe I actually figured it out. I mean, it wasn't actually that complicated. There was just like one brutal mistake that was not my fault for once. The like solar module box I bought to connect all of the panels together, which I just got like on Amazon. They for some reason had the polarity reversed on the MC4 connectors. So yeah, I just like figured it out with the multimeter after like a couple hours, like, why is this not working? Why is this not working? And then I remembered there was one comment in the review section on Amazon being like, everything is great about this, except it's in reverse. So I switched it, and now it actually works. This is like the best feeling on earth to finally have electricity at the shipping containers from a whole new solar setup.
All right, so the next step in the process is to learn a new skill, which is bending conduit.
So the reason I decided to do exposed EMT conduit is mainly just because I didn't have the brain space at the beginning of this build to figure out electrical wiring. And I kind of also prefer having it exposed just because it makes it much easier in the future to change stuff. And the layout and use of these spaces is basically constantly changing and evolving. So it would make sense to have an electrical system that can also change relatively quickly. Having everything behind the walls makes that quite challenging. So yeah, that's why we went with this option, and it turned out to be kind of annoying getting the wires through just because it's the first time I've ever done a project like this, and you kind of need two people to make it work well, one person to pull the wires and one person to feed them through. I had thought initially that I'd be able to do this part entirely alone, but it was super helpful having our friend Noah come, and he also helped build the couch, which houses the batteries and inverter.
Correct.
Hey, correct.
All right, last one. Moment of truth.
Yes, correct.
All right, it is November 2023. The office is done. It's been about a year since I started the solar project, and I just wanted to show you how everything turned out. We got Freya on her bed. The batteries are down there. The inverter is back there. All of the breakers and fuses are in there. And then up top, we have the Renogy One core, which is really cool. So it shows you the batteries are charging 9.93 amps. They're gonna be full in 6 hours. We have full sunlight on the panels back there, but we have a mini split running in the bedroom. So even with a mini split running, the batteries are still charging. And the really cool thing about this system is that it allows you to monitor the batteries remotely from anywhere you have a Wi-Fi connection. Also, I put a bunch of vents in the top of the couch so it doesn't get hot. It's not even remotely warm, but it does act as like a mini heater for the office in the winter, which is nice. Outside we have the generator, which allows us to charge the batteries through the inverter charger at 40 amps current. And then we also have the solar panels, which obviously work really, really well, but only when the sun is shining. So this is the app, and it shows here the batteries are going to be fully charged in 2 hours, 23 minutes. Each battery is getting about 6 amps. And then if you click on the inverter, you can see we're getting solar power right now. 16 amps at 98 volts is leading to a battery charging amps of 24, which is pretty cool. Load amps are at 3.4 right now. So that's mainly my editing setup, which is taking some electricity from the batteries. And then obviously if we run a mini split, that's gonna take like 20 amps, but we don't have any running right now. There's also the shore power option up top, which would be on if we were using the generator to charge the batteries. So really, really cool to be able to see all of the metrics. Thanks so much for watching this video, and a big thank you to Renogy for helping us set up our off-grid system. If you'd like to check out some of their supplies at Renogy.com, make sure to use the Wild We Roam offer code to get a 5% discount. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.